everyone. We are thrilled to have you this evening for Where We Stand, the City of Boston's first Women of Color Mayoral Candidate Forum. My name is Mujia, and I use the she, her pronouns, and I am the co-founder of We Ceremony. I am joined by my colleague, childhood friend, and co-founder, Ileana Panamino, and our wonderful moderator, who's also a writer and housing activist, Beya Jimenez. We Ceremony is a digital platform that uses storytelling to empower women of color. And Ileana and I created We Ceremony for women of color to feel safe and validated in our experiences. Since our inception in 2015, we have hosted intersectional events throughout and beyond the greater Boston area. We have worked with community leaders and individuals to create space for our community members. We've also worked with organizations and institutions such as the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Creative Mornings, Voto Latino, and Harvard Kennedy School. This forum, however, is particularly significant. Not only is it historic for the city of Boston to have women of color heavily represented in this mayoral race, but it is a monumental moment for women of color to feel seen and represented. As a proud Taiwanese American woman who immigrated to the US in 1997 and who grew up in a low-income household, I never imagined we'd host a conversation like the one we will have this evening. Tonight, this conversation is for us. We are here to center the work and stories of women of color and to create a space where our voices and our concerns are elevated and heard. It is also important to know that we are not endorsing any candidates. Now, to help me kick off this evening, we have a special message from our Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley. Congresswoman Pressley was the first Black woman elected to the Boston City Council and the first Black woman elected to Congress from Massachusetts. Ileana will now play the video for us.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to join you in virtual community for a few moments to mark this historic event and this historic time in the city of Boston. But first, thank you to We Ceremony and Beya Jimenez for bringing us all together. And thank you for the invitation to offer some brief reflections. Now, look, you're not here from me. I know you all are eager to hear from these visionary, extraordinary, dedicated public servants who put themselves forward to run for mayor of the city of Boston. But I do think it's important that we take a moment to pause, to take stock of, and to celebrate this diverse, dynamic, passionate group of women. It takes a lot of courage to put your name on the ballot. Trust me, I know. So I think it's important that we take stock of just how far we have come. Thanks to the courage and convictions of Kim, of Michelle, of Andrea, and Anissa, we are a better city. Behind me, there's a picture of Shirley Chisholm. And I don't know any woman in politics who has not at some point quoted Shirley Chisholm. And they've probably used this quote: if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring your own folding chair. Well, I'll amend that, because there's no real value in bringing a new chair to an old table. My sisters in service are creating an entirely new table, a table that I could never have envisioned or dreamed of when I first ran for and was elected to the Boston City Council. When I ran for the Boston City Council, I was the only woman running in a field of 15 candidates. Consequently, I had the humbling honor of being elected to the Boston City Council, serving as the first woman of color, the first Black woman in its 100-year history. And for more than one of my terms, in fact, served as the only woman on that 13-member body. So imagine what it felt like when just 8 mere years later, as I was leaving that body, that the council was half women and majority women of color. This is certainly a testament to the courage, to the convictions, to the visionary leadership of these women who are all running for mayor. But it is also a testament to the communities who elected them. Thank you for recognizing the importance of having leadership parity, both in gender and in race, around our policy and decision-making tables and in the corridors of power. Thank you to an electorate that gets it, that government is better when it reflects the diverse constituencies that it serves. It's not because it just makes our photo ops better, although we're pretty darn cute. It's not so that we can pat ourselves on the back about how much more progressive we are. It's because when women are at the table, we shake the table. We call the question. We bring a different perspective. We shift the dialogue, and that in turn shifts policies, and that in turn changes the trajectory of the city of Boston. So I salute you, my sisters in service. I'm immensely proud of all of you and inspired by each and every one of you. So again, thank you, We Ceremony, for marking this historic time in the city of Boston and celebrating this caliber of talent and this unprecedented field of mayoral candidates. And again, thank you to Beya Jimenez for the invitation. Enjoy.
Thank you so much to Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and her amazing team for organizing this message. Now I will hand it over to our moderator for the evening, Beya.
Thank you so much, Moo. And I just love hearing our Congresswoman talk about this historic moment. Welcome everyone to the first ever Women of Color Boston Mayoral Forum. My name is Beya Jimenez. I use the she series pronouns, and I am your moderator and host for the evening. I am so humbled to host space with all of you tonight, and I hope each of you that are tuning in are safe and healthy. Given the historic nature of this year's Boston mayoral race, We Ceremony and I felt it was important to center the voices of women of color in our city and share an audience with the historic slate of women candidates running for mayor. In 2021, being the first woman of color to do anything is more of a cause for reflection on why it took so long. For too long here in the city of Boston, the halls of power have been held by men, and specifically white men. This problem is not unique to Boston. Both locally and nationally, the group that has been most left out of the political process has been women of color, and especially Black women. The fact that this election has a historic number of women of color running merits its own celebration. That is the purpose for this event, to center the voices of Black and brown women. We recognize that there is an additional candidate running for mayor who is a Black man. And although he is not part of the conversation tonight, I urge our audience to listen, to be curious, and reflect on how we can move our city forward across all fronts. To our audience, we want to thank you because you submitted so many thoughtful questions, and we are honored to be a conduit for the voices of Black and brown women tonight. We'll begin with opening statements from each of the candidates. We will kick it off in alphabetical order, and each candidate will have 2 minutes for their opening. Once we dive into our questions, we will reverse the order, and each candidate will have 45 seconds to answer. Throughout the event, we will also hear from community voices who will have the opportunity to ask their question live for each candidate. And with that, let's begin our forum. I'll kick it off to Councilor Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Beya, and thank you, of course, to We Ceremony and to everyone for being here this evening. And thank you to our fabulous and awesome Congresswoman as well for her kind words and opening remarks. Yes, I'm Andrea Campbell. I have been on the council for the last 6 years, repping largely Dorchester, Mattapan, where I live with my husband and 2 boys, and a little bit of Jamaica Plain and Rosendale. I have worked on a whole host of issues: housing affordability, improving our Boston public schools, policing reform, economic opportunity, always with centering not only equity, but women and Black women. And I appreciate your intentionality in naming the disparities and how they are worse for Black women in particular. My entire life has been shaped by this city. I deeply love the city of Boston. I was born and raised here. I grew up in Roxbury in the South End. I'm a product of Boston Public Schools. I graduated Latin school and went to Princeton University and then UCLA for law school. Then I came back home and started my career in Roxbury representing parents in education cases. I've worked in the state government with Governor Deval Patrick as an attorney, as well as in the private sector. But I also talk about the flip side of Boston, in that 9 years ago, my twin brother passed away while in the custody of a state prison when he was only 29 years old. And I'm getting a little emotional there. He had a disease called scleroderma and was waiting to go to trial and never made it because of receiving inadequate health care. So I often heard and hear from supporters that my story is almost reflective of the city of Boston itself. That on the one hand, this city gave me everything I could possibly need, being a poor girl growing up in Roxbury, to make it to a Princeton University. But on the flip side, we know it continues to fail so many residents, as it failed my twin brother. So when I jumped into this race, I said it really is about breaking generational cycles of poverty, trauma, and generational inequity, not just for my family, but for every family in the city of Boston. I'm more than a story. I have a long record of accomplishment on the issues. I look forward to sharing that record this evening, and really grateful to be on here with each and every one of you.
Councillor Anissa.
Thank you very much. And I'm setting my own timer to keep track. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you, to introduce myself to your audience and answer the questions that you have before us. Boston is my home. I have deep roots here, and it's a connection that drives me to work harder for the city that I love. I believe I am the right leader for this city at this moment. I'm the daughter of immigrants and a proud Arab Polish American. I'm a small business owner, and I know how devastating this pandemic has been on our businesses, large and small, and what it's going to take to recover and then grow and thrive. I'm a former teacher in the Boston Public Schools. And in my 13 years in the classroom, I had a front row seat to the challenges that our kids face, that our families face day in and day out. I know how we have to lift up our students, our educators, our school communities, close the achievement gap, and make sure that every child receives the education they deserve. These last 6 years, I've served as an at-large city councilor, proudly representing the entire city of Boston. And while I've had a list of legislative accomplishments in housing and homelessness, in mental health, recovery, and education, I'm most proud of my presence in all of our neighborhoods. I show up, I engage, I'm responsive and responsible to our city's residents. I'm also a mother of 4 boys. I know what it's like raising now 4 teenagers, a 16-year-old and 15-year-old triplets, thinking about their school, thinking about their ability to engage in their community, thinking about their future. I know today, for our families, for our city's residents, that we can't simply recover from COVID. We have a responsibility and an opportunity to reimagine, to re-engage, and to build a more equitable, better Boston for all. And to do that right, it's going to take hard work. And I'm ready for that challenge and to do that work in partnership with all of you.
Thank you. Acting Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much. I want to thank We Ceremony. I want to thank you, Beya. I want to thank our Congresswoman, all of the folks who helped organize this important conversation, and certainly everyone watching and who has submitted questions. I'm really excited about the topic and elevating women of color. As the first woman mayor and the first Black mayor for our city, I am truly humbled for the opportunity to serve and lead. I am old enough, as someone who's grew up in this city, in the neighborhoods of Roxbury and the South End in the 1970s, to remember when Mel King ran for mayor, making history himself as the first Black person to make it to the final. I was able to help on that campaign, and to now be here 40 years later is just remarkable. It's a testament of how far our city has come. And though we've come a long way, I am the first to acknowledge that we have so much more work to do. I've spent my entire career in advocacy, lifting up those who have been left behind, certainly in education, on the city council when I became the first woman to represent District 7, and for the last 4 to 5 months as mayor of Boston. I've been proud to appoint a number of women to my cabinet. We have a record number of women of color serving in cabinet positions. I've appointed 2 strong Latinas to the Boston School Committee. I have women represented in my campaign. I think this is such an important conversation. We know that in every measure, whatever the issue, it is often women who are left behind, whether we're talking about a wage gap, whether we're talking about the burden of being single mothers and having to raise children. We need to make sure that we are elevating women in every single conversation. And that is why I'm so grateful to be with you this evening to talk about these issues. I am proud to join a sisterhood of Black women mayors all across our country. There is a historic number of 9 now leading.
Acting Mayor Janey, you have ran out of time. Sorry to interrupt you. Michelle Wu.
Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone. And thank you to the organizers for all your efforts in convening us and creating space for this conversation. I am so proud to be a candidate among this amazing field and to be in my 8th year representing all of Boston on the City Council. I, like everyone here, are counting down the days to the preliminary election, but in my family, we're actually counting down even harder to just before the prelim, because that's when the first day of school is. And for the first time in years, both my kids will have one drop off together at the same place at our local public school. And so I'm living the stakes of our policy challenges. I have known my whole life what it means to be from an immigrant family and to face the invisible barriers and the visible barriers in language and culture. In my family, so much of my life trajectory was transformed and faced tremendous upheaval when my mom began to struggle with very serious mental illness. And so I ended up raising my sisters in the city, and now I'm raising my own 2 boys. I know what's possible in city government. We've seen it, not just in the legislation we've passed and the changes we've delivered, but how the city came together during the pandemic, all sectors, taking on previously unthinkable items that community members had been fighting for decades. All of a sudden, because we decided to confront our crisis and take action. Our Congresswoman Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said it earlier that this is really about a transformation that's possible when we're all at the table. And so this room, this conversation is something that I never dreamed of growing up, not seeing people who looked like me on TV or in spaces of power. And so most of all, I'm so grateful for what we could do together as we all continue to fight for the city that we love.
Thank you all. We will dive right into our questions that we received from our audience. And of course, we need to begin addressing our current ongoing pandemic. This is a question that we received from many, many audience members. Given your leadership position, how do you care for your mental health and balance your work and life? We know that right now we're facing multiple crises. So this is a question that, again, came up time and time again. We will reverse to alphabetical order. So we'll kick it off with Councillor Wu.
Thank you. And this was 45 seconds for these, right? Okay, I'll set my timer. So we, as far as I can remember, we've probably been through 50, 60 forums, have not gotten this question before at a forum. So I'm very, very grateful that we are starting here, because even after we get through this COVID pandemic and we are not through it, mental health will continue to be a pandemic that we are all living through. The isolation and fear and anxiety, and loss that so many have experienced across all parts of our communities. And in this industry, sometimes it's, what falls last is thinking about how to keep going. You compartmentalize, you keep going. For me, really staying grounded in family is the most important. And when I have time with my family, we go outside. We get out in nature in one of our beautiful parks and spaces and just try to unplug.
Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much. And I think this is why it's so important to center women. Because of the conversation around self-care. I also want to share just quickly that I do have a prior commitment, and I'm not sure, I just wanted to make sure my team communicated that I'll have to sign off at 7:30. The importance of self-care is underscored by this pandemic. This pandemic has been truly, truly traumatic for so many folks, and it is so important that we make space for self-care and to care for each other. It is why I launched the Joy Agenda in making sure that we are being intentional about holding space for joy, to connect with each other, to check on each other. And I do that, like Councilor Wu, outdoors as much as possible in our beautiful parks, and certainly with my family, my 3 grandchildren in particular.
Councilor Anissa?
Thank you for this question. I agree that this year has been difficult, isolating, upsetting, and for me, it's been also very difficult. I want to thank you too for opening up today's conversation using the topic or focusing on the topic of mental health. It's important now more than ever that we break the stigma that's associated with mental health and mental health care, certainly the struggles of work-life balance, and talking about it openly and honestly. I think with 27 days left in this race, all of us have felt a certain level of strain and stress. So I appreciate saying it out loud today that it can be hard. I find many ways to care for my own mental health, whether it's spending time with my boys, knitting.
Thank you. Councilor Campbell?
Thank you so much for this question. First and foremost, it's my faith. I don't start my day without prayer and without usually reading a scripture. I often say, but for the grace of God and my BPS education, well, I wouldn't be here. And it's my family, my husband, my beautiful husband, and of course, my parents who live directly across the street, my aunt and uncle who are my parents who help me care for the kids, but also remind me to take care of myself. My faith and my family are my foundation. And without those things, if there are any cracks in that, I know everything else will fall apart. So I invest time there and I spend a lot of time making sure that foundation is solid.
Thank you. Our second question is directly related to tonight's forum and its focus. How does your experience as a woman of color help you show up in the world? Acting Mayor Kim Janey will kick us off.
You know, it's not something you can put in a drawer when you leave the house. I bring my lived experience with me everywhere I go, and it informs how I do this work. Obviously, my life experience is very different than any of my predecessors that have come before me in a 200-year history of having mayors in the city of Boston. As the first woman, the first Black mayor, I show up and I use an equity lens, a lens of equity, justice, and love for every single resident in the city of Boston. It informs what I do every single day.
Thank you. Councilor Anissa?
Focused on my timer and my mute button. You know, I'm the daughter of immigrants. I'm very proud to be a first-generation Arab, Polish American. And throughout the course of this race and really these last 6 years in public life and the success I've been able to have in public life, I've thought about 2 people. First, my father and his experiences as an Arab, as a Muslim, as an immigrant coming here to the United States as a young man, and the words he spoke to me when I expressed an interest in running for office someday, where he said, an Arab girl with an Arab name will never win anything in this city. And then I think about how far we've come as a city, yet how much more work we have to do and how important representation is for all of our women and children across our city.
Councilor Campbell?
Well, I obviously bring my full self as a Black woman. I've experienced, obviously, I think many of the issues we're going to talk about tonight. I'm a mother. I gave birth to 2 boys. And so I felt the fear and thought about Black maternal health data and stats. I have grown up poor in the city of Boston, lived in public housing. I have relatives who are still incarcerated and behind the wall. So I felt that pain. I have felt the discrimination of being in this skin and in this body, but use this lived experience, frankly, to inform the policy. So I often say I'm more than a story. The story and the lived experience bring a sense of compassion, empathy, and urgency to the issues we have to grapple with. And those are many issues, but it does matter what the lived experience is. So thank you for this question.
Our next question is also related to.
Sorry, Beya, I didn't go yet on this one.
I'm so sorry, Councilor Wu. Please continue.
No worries. Okay, let me get my timer.
Thank you, everyone.
I am proud to be an Asian American woman. My whole life and my lived experience has, in some ways, until very recently, felt like a barrier to disconnect my family and me from the structures of power and decision-making. And so now on this side of government, as a woman of color, my lived experience drives urgency and intersectionality more than anything else. That just like how we can't take off different parts of our identity and the often multiple ways that we are seeing the world differently or facing challenges, all of our communities and all of our issues are very closely intertwined. And I make sure that as we are bringing that lens of leadership and equity, we are truly including everyone in Boston.
Thank you so much, Councillor Wu, and please, my apologies. As we move on, the next question has a similar focus. What are some of the ways you offer mentorship to young women of color? We will begin with Anissa.
So I think the most important thing any leader can do is build a very strong bench, and bench strength, both in power and athletics and in work, is such an important thing to develop. My city council office is majority women, including women of color, and I work every day to empower them with the opportunities to engage in the work that they're passionate about, and also to build a skill set for their own futures. It's the same for my campaign team. It's critical that we are providing chances for the next generation to have a real stake in Boston's future. I think it's also important that we are including those that are dealing with varying abilities. When we think about our disability community, that we are also engaging them in our work and
Councillor Campbell.
One, I hire them. So whether as a counselor, as a candidate for office, my first race for the council and my mayoral race is being run by a woman. I have a majority woman team. And actually, when you think about these candidate races or mayoral races, you have to hire consultants. And so it was intentional about making sure that there were women of color as a part of my consultant crew, which is really difficult to find in this country, frankly. But as a lawyer, I was involved with the Mass Black Lawyers Association and other places to mentor young lawyers. I still do that, really intentional about that level of giving back, because I know we have to prepare the next generation of leaders. And so I give my time, I invest, and I give my energy as well.
Councillor Michelle.
Thank you. I agree with much of what has been said. Sometimes the most tangible ways that we can mentor are to create opportunity and make sure the doors are wide open. And so I'm proud of the teams that I've built on the city council side and across all of my campaigns, including this one where we are led by a woman of color, where we have incredible senior staff, many women of color and people of color. And to know that in every platform that I have, whether it's who's speaking at a major press conference or event that we have, who is leading an initiative that we're partnering on, that I work to center women of color. I also want to use every platform I have to recruit others to run for office, to join Democratic Ward Committee.
Acting Mayor Janey.
You know, I will echo what I heard here already. It is so important to invest in young women. I've done that throughout my entire career when I was leading in the nonprofit space, always making sure to hire and give opportunity to young people. I've done that on the council as well. And certainly as mayor, I'm very proud to have a number of women leading in roles on my campaign. My campaign manager is a woman. My field director is a woman, my finance director is a woman. We've got a number of field organizers and interns and fellows. You know, it is so important to build that bench to show the way so that we can have others who share in the same position and continue to move us forward. Let's turn that down.
Thank you so much. Our next question focuses on the past year. We have seen an influx of support for racial equity following the killing of George Floyd. But we know that there is joy in resistance, and uprisings have a way of helping us shift focus to create a better world. What examples of organizing have cheered you on in the last year? We will kick it off with Councillor Campbell.
Well, one, the organizing in Georgia. Stacey Abrams and all those who mobilized on the ground to take back the presidency. the organizing around Kamala Harris, who I supported as a candidate for president. And then, of course, those who took to the streets right here in Boston to demand policing reform. And when I remarked recently at our recent budget hearing, when I voted no on the operating budget, it was because I said to those who took to the streets that I continued to see them and to hear them. And I wouldn't let issues like policing reform, social justice, and racial justice issues die. It's also the very things that inspired me to jump into this mayor's race back in September. I said I was done waiting on the sidelines for someone else to do the work of actually taking action to create racial equity.
Councillor Isabi George.
When I think about community organizing, especially over this last year, what's been most inspiring to me is what's been the events and the interactions that have been mostly led by our young people. And when I think about the work of our young people, it is just not just simply inspiring, but it creates such an amazing sense of love and community. Community organizing plays such a critical role in the fabric of our city. It's a big part of our history. And I'm inspired not only by the organizing itself, but by the members behind it. I also have to say, I'm especially as an owner of the Stitch House and a member of a crafting community, I've been particularly inspired by crafters.
Acting Mayor Janey.
So I was born during the civil rights movement of the 1960s into a family of activists and advocates. And so it was no surprise to any of them that I became a community organizer when I was in my 20s. I am so inspired because it is always young people who are leading the way, whatever the social justice movement. And certainly we've seen that people organizing around getting more Black women in particular into office. We've seen that as people have taken the streets to protest and demand for justice when it comes to our criminal justice system. We've seen that when it is around the wealth gap and income inequality and so many other issues. And so I continue to be inspired by our young people.
Councillor Wu.
Boston has such a legacy of standing up and building coalitions and fighting the important fights all throughout the history and from the founding of the city. And the more recent advocacy and organizing we've seen has been particularly inspiring to me because it is not just about coming together for an event or one demonstration, but to change the structures and to actually deliver policy changes. So whether it was mutual aid organizations and community fridges now pushing to food policy changes, or the Asian American community coming together and pushing to actually get at root causes and build coalitions across all communities to end racism and hate.
I have to say, this is the only time I'll be able to mute elected officials. So thank you so much for being patient with us. I want to take a pause during our forum to introduce a community voice that is near and dear to our heart. East Boston resident Fiona Fee, if you can please turn on your video. She has a great question for all of you candidates.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Fiona, is they, she pronouns. I'm happy to be here. I have a two-part question, and I also send the question in the chat for those who may need it. So yes or no, as mayor, are you willing to set new precedents to make a more civically engaged budget? And the second part of the question is, considering the Office of Participatory Budgeting is completely disconnected from the youth participatory budgeting process, how do you plan to unify the city for the budgeting process to best serve all community members, opposed to closed-door budgeting deals with special interests, such as real estate developers and police unions?
We'll reverse to alphabetical order. So Michelle, you can kick us off. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for the question and for your advocacy, which I'm well aware of behind this question for a very long time as well. The first part, yes, absolutely. And the second part, we need to not just commit to different budget amounts in different places. And I fully support the ballot initiative that will strengthen this and give the council and residents more democratic accountability. But to make sure that we are breaking this down so we escape a timeline where there's a tiny window for residents to weigh in, by which time it's really too late for major changes to be made. We need to start out in the community, not inside and then give the community a window, but to start out in our neighborhoods and build up from there.
Acting Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much. The answer is yes, and I have invested in the FY22 budget for the Office of Participatory Budgeting, as well as supporting and signing the legislation that is now at the State House. And yes, we need more youth at the table. There should not be a disconnect. It should be all one of the same, a process that engages all of the residents of Boston and how our money is spent and where we need to invest that money. 10 seconds left. Look at that.
I know.
No mute.
Each of you are getting better and better. I love it. Councillor Isabi George.
Thank you, Fiona, very much for the question and your engagement in this work. For sure, yes, we have to do this participatory budget piece. And the conversations that electeds have with the public, with our city's residents, should not only happen during budget season. For me, that work starts at the very end of the last budget cycle. We have to get to work immediately. And it's our role, our capacity, our responsibility to engage with our city's residents across the board, of all interests, of all neighborhoods, of all ages, and engage them in the conversations around setting the budget for the following year. And for me, it's about creating and setting that table where everyone is engaged and has an opportunity to be heard.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Fiona, for the question. The short answer is yes. And on the other side, I've always taken budget votes informed by the community. And I've invested in civic leaders in my current district, resources, raising resources. I did a civic summit. And I'm the only candidate what I call a plan called good governance. And in 45 seconds, you can't go through that. So check out my website. But it really talks about creating an office, not only for folks to be able to come to and engage in the budget process, but also the city of Boston investing in residents and their ability to organize and to learn those skills, which is just as important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for that great question. We will continue with our forum. One of the questions that we received from our audience, many members very concerned about the height of gun violence in Boston. So for our candidates, we would like to ask, what is your plan to reduce gun violence in Boston's neighborhoods? And how will you work with our district attorney to focus on decentering policing as the primary response? We'll kick it off with Acting Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much. Earlier this year, I released my summer safety plan with District Attorney Rachel Rollins that focused on intervention and prevention. I am very encouraged that we have seen homicides down in our city this year compared to last, as well as fatal shootings and non-fatal shootings. This issue is very personal to me as I live in a community that deals with gun violence on a regular basis, unfortunately. And so while I'm encouraged that these numbers are down, I know that any shooting is one too many and that we have to continue to work together with the police, with the district attorney's office to make sure that we are decentering. And this is why I did a mental health pilot to reimagine how we police.
Councillor Isabi George.
Gun violence is certainly an epidemic that strikes our streets every single day. Just last week, there were 3 shootings, including 1 fatality in one night. The week prior, there were 40 shots overnight in our neighborhood of Roxbury. And then over a course of an earlier weekend this summer, there were 200 shots fired. Gun violence is a racial justice issue, a public health issue, and a public safety issue. It's a result of breaks in our system, in our systems. It's part of our cycle of poverty. It's a lack of opportunity for too many of our residents. And certainly it's instability and trauma for our city's residents. They are bearing the brunt of this epidemic, and we have to do more in partnership to end this
Councillor Campbell.
I don't want to work towards just decreasing violence in the city of Boston. I want to work towards eradicating it. I'm the only candidate with the most comprehensive, specific public safety plan on how to do that. And Rachel Rollins actually reviewed and vetted my plan, took red ink to it, along with officers and so many other stakeholders. And it's twofold. It says we need to restructure our police department so every neighborhood has the adequate number of officers to respond to the incidents in a reasonable time. So when you call, someone shows up. And then to take the savings by that restructuring and invest it in the root causes of violence. The organizations on the ground, not the city, who are actually doing the work of removing guns off our street, coupled with, of course, the work of our police officers as well. But the root causes need investment. That's what my plan does in order to eradicate and work towards eradicating violence in the city of Boston.
Councillor Wu.
We just have to look at what has happened in Boston in the past to know what works and to know the investments that make a real impact for eliminating gun violence. When we put money towards youth opportunity and creating jobs and making sure there are safe spaces for community to celebrate, to be together, that we're using city resources like community centers and other spaces to not just close at 5 p.m., but to be open and available, that makes a difference. We know that leaning on partnerships with community members and those doing the work on the ground makes a difference. I'm proud to have been pushing for us to rethink policing in general, to lead from a public health lens, particularly when it comes to.
Thank you so much. Our next question focuses on housing, something that is very dear and near to my heart. Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, highlights eviction as a top issue affecting Black and Brown women-led households. With our current affordability and eviction crisis still threatening the housing security of many Boston families, what policies will you promote to stabilize our rental housing market and support renters across all incomes? We'll kick it off with Councillor Isabi George.
This pandemic has only highlighted how fragile our housing market is. We need to make more affordable housing accessible for our city's families and make sure that anyone who wants to call Boston home can. As mayor, I will increase our housing stock, both on the ownership side and on the rental side. We will build more affordable housing. We will make sure that our housing is reflective of the needs of the realities of our city's residents, whether it's family-sized units, workforce housing, artist live-work space, and senior citizen housing. We need to create those better paths, direct paths to home ownership with a focus on generation.
Councillor Campbell.
I appreciate this question. In the immediate, extending the eviction moratorium, of course, continuing to invest in rental relief funds, which not only help tenants, but help landlords. And I'm really proud of my record on creating housing affordability. My first piece of legislation was the CPA. It's generating $20 million every year for affordable housing. I started the Vacant Lot initiative in the city of Boston, activating city-owned spaces for homeownership opportunities, including for women. I would expand upon that and activate 100 lots within my first 100 days. I often say we can't forget the folks who live in public housing, low income and no income, women. I brought a program into the Housing Authority that is moving women and many of them women, I should say, but residents out of poverty and into homeownership opportunities. I would expand upon that program and a lot more.
Councillor Wu.
This is at such a level of crisis and urgency all across our city. Every time I'm knocking on doors or out in community, housing affordability, housing instability is what is fever pitch, what everyone is worried about. We need to use every possible tool to address this, to tackle the root causes. We need more housing in Boston, and we need to make sure we're putting city funds to building that affordable housing, integrating affordable housing into city-owned property and the redevelopment of city-owned land, streamlining our zoning processes so we can expedite affordable housing. But that's not enough to just do all we can to try to increase how many units there are. There's a crisis right now of displacement. I'm proud to be the only candidate consistently for rent control or rent stabilization as well.
Acting Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much. In my very first week, I invested $50 million in rental relief, and we've already helped 3,400 households stay in their homes, helping them negotiate deals with their landlords. In addition, homeownership continues to be a way to help stabilize our communities. I've tripled the investment for down payment assistance, taking that from $10,000 to $40,000. That also helps with us breaking the generational cycle of poverty and building generational wealth. We know that COVID has exacerbated an already existing housing crisis. We've got to do more to make sure that we are helping everyone who wants to call Boston stay in our city.
Thank you. I want to take a brief pause to invite another community voice to join us. We are pleased to welcome Coralis Negrete of YW Boston, who will have a question for all of the candidates.
Greetings, Acting Mayor Janey, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Ivy George, and Councillor Wu. I'm thankful for your time and grateful to We Ceremony for inviting me to participate in this important forum. I'm Coralis Negrete, Director of Marketing and Communications at YW Boston. As the country's first YWCA, YW Boston is dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. One way we are pursuing this mission is through legislation that ensures representation and leadership that better reflects our Commonwealth, specifically through House Bill 3157, an act to ensure gender parity and racial and ethnic diversity on public boards and commissions. Given the impact public boards and commissions have on important policies and initiatives regarding education, housing, and economic development, my question is, what specific actions will you take to ensure that women of color have parity and representation in city leadership, boards, and commissions? Thank you.
Thank you, Coralis. We'll kick it off with Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Coralis, and thank you for citing that bill, which I absolutely support. But a few different things. One, we absolutely in the city of Boston need to make sure that our administration reflects the communities we serve. And we have a lot more work to do to ensure that women are reflected, that those who identify as in the transgender community as well, particularly Black trans women, are also a part of the city of Boston's workforce. So I've committed to ensuring that my cabinet is reflective of this reality of the demographics of the city of Boston. I've committed to making sure that the pay equity, the pay in the salaries are fair and equal and equitable across the board, along with the benefits as well. And then also pushing for the private community, our hospitals, our medical institutions.
Thank you. Councillor Ivy George.
It's a great question. I think it speaks to one of the questions we answered a little bit earlier, or started to in some way. When we think about gender parity, when we think about racial and ethnic diversity across our city's boards and commissions, the first place I, as mayor, will start is with my cabinet, with the big kids table. When we think about those that are leading the work, that table needs to be diverse. We need to empower and authorize those leaders with those diverse backgrounds, with gender considerations and racial considerations to do the work that they are charged to do. Then we need to take a look and analyze our city's boards and commissions, analyze leadership across the board, and make sure that it is reflective of our city's population.
Acting Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate being here with you this evening. I will have to go after this question, but my commitment is in my action. I've appointed 3 women of color as cabinet chiefs, bringing that number to a historic 6 women of color on my cabinet. I've done this on the Boston School Committee, making sure that there was Latina representation on this board. I've appointed one very historic and groundbreaking, and as she spent some time as a child, undocumented. The other is the first time we've ever had someone whose primary language is something other than English. Groundbreaking work. We're going to continue to do this work together, and I certainly hope to earn your votes and support on September.
Councillor Wu.
Thank you so much, Coralis, for this question. And I'm very proud to have been part of the coalition pushing for this, and even last legislative session to be able to help set up some conversations and personally be there lobbying and advocating at the State House with you all on this particular bill. I'd be even more excited to have direct influence and authority to be able to make this happen at the city level, where we have so many seats available that are important policy-making decisions. And I know it's already going to make a huge difference in the city that we have our newest Fair Housing Commissioner here representing the community. And we want to make sure that not only are the cabinet and positions all the way through City Hall on staff reflective of and representative of the city, but that boards and commissions are as well. And I would be sure to.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Stay with us. You're going to kick off the next question. This question is directed to our undocumented community. Boston is a sanctuary city, a status that reflects our city's position in welcoming new immigrants. Yet the Boston Police Department continues to voluntarily work alongside ICE federal agents, and our Trust Act language contains loopholes that undermine these protections. Given the catastrophic events happening around the world, Governor Baker's recent remarks seem to signal support for housing refugees in Massachusetts. As we consider these policies, what are some innovative ways you will help expand protections for undocumented families, close the loopholes that leave undocumented families vulnerable, and support refugees beyond our current policies? I'll bring it back to Councillor Wu.
I have already said loudly and proudly that Boston has a history of being a safe and welcoming city, offering that to the world, and we should continue to step up in this current crisis for refugees who may need shelter from Afghanistan or migrant families from the devastation in Haiti. Boston's role is to be that place of sanctuary. I've been proud to pass and now lead the charge on filing more legislation that would codify this, particularly focusing on Boston Public Schools and restricting school police from interactions with federal immigration enforcement. We want to see this passed. We're so close and on the last working sessions in the council. We also need every touch point with city government to be safe, welcoming, and reiterating this message.
Councillor Isabi George.
First, I want to say that I support ending information sharing between the Boston Police Department and ICE. I also support closing the loopholes in Boston's Trust Act that would allow BPD to share some of that information with ICE. Our police department needs to focus on public safety, not immigrant enforcement. Our immigrant communities must be able to trust our city's institutions. I'm the daughter of immigrants, and my mother especially, who immigrated here from a displaced persons camp in post-World War II Germany. I know and appreciate how much immigrants have built Boston. My grandparents and my parents helped build Boston, and they continue, our immigrant population continues to play a critical role in our city. As mayor, I will celebrate, embrace, and welcome.
Councillor Campbell.
I share the story of my twin brother, Andre, often because what many folks don't know is that he died as a pretrial detainee, meaning he hadn't gone to trial for anything. He was waiting to go to trial for 2 years and did not receive adequate health care and died while in that system. Because of that loss, I stress it because I see the humanity in everyone, regardless of their status. As a counselor, I have fought to not only make sure we're a safe and welcoming city, but that everyone, regardless of their status, including those who are undocumented or eligible for benefits, and no one has taken on the police department like me. I'm sitting on an $850,000 grant from the BRIC and saying, you can't have that money until you fix your policies and sever ties with ICE. I will continue that leadership because that's what it's going to take. Even when it's not popular, it's hard work. That won't change.
Thank you. We have one final community voice who has joined us tonight. I'm so delighted to welcome my dear friend and writer, Nakia Hill.
Thank you, Beya. Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be here with all of you tonight. As a former Boston artist in residence, I can attest to how momentous that appointment just catapulted my writing career. My question to all of you tonight, honorable mayoral candidates this evening is, what are your plans to help connect artists to increase funding, opportunities, and gain access to affordable housing in the city of Boston? And I'll also put my question in the chat as well. Thank you.
We'll start with Councillor Isabi George.
Thank you, Nakia, so much for that question, and congratulations on your success. And I'm grateful that the city of Boston has, through its efforts, been able to create some of that pathway to your success. I don't doubt for a moment it would have happened without us, but we need to continue to invest in our artist community and our cultural experiences across our city. It is what makes Boston unique. And as we walk further away from that commitment to the arts and to culture, Boston becomes less special. As a little bit of an artist myself, I appreciate how important it is for us to continue those investments and to create space for our artists to live, to work, and to share their gifts with our city.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Nakia, for the question. First, we can start by designating artists as essential workers, because that's really what it's been during COVID, and it has not been recognized. I've been in a whole host of conversations, was recently at the Piano Factory, and I grew across the street talking about these very issues. I started the Vacant Lot Initiative in the city of Boston. And why? We have hundreds, actually thousands, but hundreds of city-owned lots that can be activated right now. 30 of them are out for RFPs along Blue Hill Ave. I have been pushing for some of those lots to be designated as artist housing and homeownership opportunities or mixed use. So a space to actually do the work while also creating space for housing all in the same building. And I've been telling the city at moments, maybe we should give those lots away for $1 to make it easier for this to happen.
Councillor Wu.
Thank you so much, Nakia, and thank you for this question. The arts are essential and must be integrated with every way we think about city government and city services touching people's lives. And so I was thinking about 3 categories: of policy, personnel, and promotion. And so we need the policies to recognize artists as community members, as those residents in need of housing, of schools, of support networks, and to make sure that we are bringing that artist perspective to how we do all of those issues. I would hire not just artists in residence, but full-time artists in our departments to run and bring that perspective all the time, not just for 1 year at a time. And last but not least, Boston's an arts city. We need a mayor who's going to champion the arts as a critical part of our economy. And
Thank you. The next question was, again, received by our audience. So thank you so much for all these thoughtful questions, and thank you to the candidates for bearing with us with the time. The call for reparations has amplified in the past decade as a growing wealth gap continues to threaten our equity efforts. Cities like Evanston, Illinois, voted in March 2021 to implement a program that allotted $400,000 for descendants of trafficked and enslaved peoples who could trace their lineage within the city. Define what reparations mean to you and how you envision the city of Boston leading on this front. We'll kick it off with Andrea.
So reparations for me is around restorative justice policies. And actually, we need to go farther than just reparations when you think about righting the wrongs of the past. And so I actually put out something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Here, I put out a hearing order on this very topic to say, I think we need to establish that in the city of Boston, not only to force all of us in the city to address our painful history we often don't want to talk about, but to explore what some of these restorative justice policies are. Reparations, guaranteed income pilot program should absolutely be a part of that conversation. It could be used for food insecurity, home ownership opportunities, capital investments for business owners, and so much more. But it's more than reparations. There are several action steps the city can take in order to respond to the past history of division and segregation in the city of Boston.
Councillor Wu.
Reparations is about addressing the harms in our history that we have intentionally perpetuated through policies that have driven the inequities, that have put up barriers from creating and passing down generational wealth for Black and Brown residents, that again, were choices through policy that we perpetuated. And so to move forward in a way that creates space for healing and for conversation, we do have to address what has happened in the past. And that's through policies intentionally designed to bring repair and to ensure that we are closing these gaps, from home ownership to access to opportunities within the city and jobs, and especially in our green economy. We can close the racial wealth.
Councillor Isabi George.
Everything that the city of Boston does, including basic city services and youth programming, must be designed through this lens. We must, when we think about reparations, include programs that are addressing and working to close the racial wealth gap, that are increasing access to good public transportation, that's creating more pathways to home ownership and affordable home ownership to create that generational wealth that's so important, that we're even planting more trees as part of our tree canopy across our city. And for sure that we are providing access to high quality education for every one of our kids. We have to be intentional in this work. We have to be intentional about program design and creating access to these opportunities.
Thank you. The next question is regarding climate change. Climate change is one of the most urgent issues of our lifetime. Climate advocates and youth organizers support putting a cap on carbon emissions. What role do you see carbon pricing playing in climate policy? And how will your office prioritize protecting vulnerable communities most impacted by climate change? We'll kick it off with Councillor Wu.
Climate justice is racial and economic justice. This is going to be the challenge that we will see the world through for the next 100 years, and the window to act is closing. And so with regard to carbon pricing in general, I do think we need to take every possible incentive to curb emissions. I have fully supported the state's efforts to join the Regional Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is kind of structured in that same way. And at the city level, we can do so much. I'm proud to have put forward the first city level Green New Deal anywhere in the country, to have earned the support of every single climate group that has weighed in this race, because when cities lead, and especially when Boston leads, that builds the momentum for true change. It's, as Anissa was saying, tree canopy, it's moving to electric school buses, housing justice, it all is.
Councillor Isabi George.
So while carbon pricing is certainly a tool that the city can use to reduce emissions, I don't think it should be the only one to dominate the conversation around climate action. Boston's approach to climate can be integrated and must be integrated into everything that we do. And we need to make sure that this discussion is centered around our communities, especially our communities that are most disproportionately impacted by environmental injustice. It means mitigating how air pollution affects how our residents are experiencing living under flight paths. I talk a lot about coaching softball in East Boston and looking at the ass end of airplanes all day and then wondering why we have high rates of asthma. We have to grow that tree.
Thank you. And Councillor Campbell?
I support, obviously, carbon pricing as one tool in the toolkit to respond to these major issues. I'm really proud of my plan. It is specific, it is practical, it's doable. Most importantly, it centers communities of color. Some of our climate maps didn't even include Mattapan. That's where I lived. And so clearly the city of Boston has not centered communities of color in this conversation. And if we don't, we will absolutely fail, and this movement will fail. And so my plan is specific on tracking data that is relevant, including lead, exposure to lead, gas leaks, the lack of trees, of course, in certain neighborhoods, asthma rates, air pollution, and then taking that data to use it to inform policies. And then investing in communities of color around tree canopy.
Sorry, Andrea, but we will stay right with you. The next question, again, very deep question. So thank you so much to our audience and our candidates for doing your best to answer given our time constraint. Our nation's maternal mortality rates are unacceptable, and Black and Brown pregnant people in particular face the highest risk of dying in childbirth. Centuries of medical discrimination and racism have caused these disparate health outcomes, as well as distrust of the medical establishment. People of color, and in particular Black people, deserve equitable access. How will your plan help support policies that bring health equity to the focus? Councillor Campbell, I'll come to you.
It will never be covered in 45 seconds, so I'm going to say this to everyone who's viewing this. AndreaCampbell.org, my environmental plan, but my public health plan I'm most proud of. And in that plan, I talk about Black maternal health. One, we absolutely can make sure everyone has access to a primary care physician, particularly those who are undergoing pregnancy or thinking about it. That is one way that is proven to reduce risk in a pregnancy. The second is coverage, ensuring that doula services and other things like that are made a part of coverage. We know that works to address these issues. And lastly, pulling on our ecosystem and our healthcare community, including the life sciences, to be a part of the solutions in closing these gaps. If they can go to Africa and deal with malaria, they can do it here, dealing with this issue in the city of Boston.
Councillor Wu.
You know, we often talk about the United States as being leading the way on every issue and truly exceptional, but there are many, many places where, especially when it comes to the inequities and structural racism, that the United States is far behind. One of these areas is around how we think about pregnant and parenting working people. I was proud to introduce and pass the city's paid parental leave ordinance many years ago now, and to unfortunately have to lead the way at the city level because we are still one of 2 countries around the world that does not have a federal policy in that way. I set my own timer. I had like 10 seconds, maybe 10 seconds left.
Go ahead, Councillor.
It's getting even shorter and shorter. Okay, so I'll just wrap up in saying we are a mecca of healthcare here. And so we need to make sure that that is accessible to every family. There are huge gaps within access, not because the care is not there, but because we're not connecting our communities.
Thank you. Councillor Anissa.
I think this is a fascinating question. And I think these 45-second responses are brutal because as women especially, we enjoy getting into the weeds, especially on a topic like maternal health and the sometimes inappropriate, inadequate access to prenatal care, especially for our Black and Brown communities. We've got to support our community-based health centers that are delivering culturally competent and care in the languages that our residents speak and understanding their needs very directly. We have to make sure that our city's residents are connected to, especially our poorer communities, are connected to that high quality downtown hospital care. As someone who has experienced pregnancy difficulty, it is so important that we are doing this.
Thank you so much. And all of you have been great sports tonight. So I really appreciate that. And Councillor Wu, my apologies for cutting your time short in the previous question. Okay, lots of great questions. Again, thank you so much to our audience. We'll give you a light round because we are interested in also getting to know you as regular people. So a fun question that we have and that we're all curious about, so we'll be bringing out our phones. What is your favorite restaurant in Boston?
I don't find these fun. That's why I'm still laughing. These are terrible questions. They make us like pick your favorite ice cream, vanilla or strawberry, and then you offend strawberry.
Okay, so
I saw
Counselor
it.
Sabi. No, thank you. Please let us know.
My favorite restaurant in the city of Boston, it depends on what community I'm in, but if I were to pick my favorite go-to, it is De Palma's in East Boston. That's it. Do I need more? Can I take the rest of my?
Oh, you're good. You're good. I was hoping for
I'll
one
go
from
through-
the neighborhood, but it's all good.
Oh, all right, I'll go.
Counselor Campbell, what's your favorite restaurant in Boston?
I'm still laughing at Anissa. That was too funny. This is not fun. Right now, we tend to go to 50 Kitchen a lot in Dorchester. We have a lot, but that's the one we go to often for takeout because we are still in COVID.
Thank you. Counselor Wu?
There's so many. I'll just go with the one we probably go to most often just for comfort food and when you don't want to think. It's Dumpling Cafe in Chinatown, kind of off to the side a little bit on Washington. So the lines aren't long. Food is great, but we have lots of favorites in other neighborhoods too.
Great. Thank you so much. What book are you currently reading? I'll bring it to Andrea.
I'm reading a few books. Oh my goodness. My laptop is on it. You're gonna love this. This is The Condemnation of Blackness. It's dense, but it's good.
Okay, gonna have to pick that up. Counselor Anissa?
I'm reading right now. I've got a couple started, but the one that's closest to me is Dismayed and Driven, which is a book around family homelessness across the country.
Thank you. An important issue. Counselor Wu?
I was just Googling to make sure I got the full title right. It's A Decade of Urban School Reform. It's Paul Revel's book on former Superintendent Tom Paysan's time in Boston and the advances that were made. May he rest in peace.
Thank you. Michelle, I'll stick with you. Folks want to know, what show are you currently watching?
So we just finished watching the Disney show with my kids, The Mysterious Benedict Society.
Andrea, how about you?
It's Bluey with the kids, and for me at night, it's Downtown Abbey. Don't ask. It makes you forget everything.
Counselor Isabi George?
So I'm a go to the office kind of girl. Like I love The Office. I've probably watched every episode many times. But my my sort of little delight was the Netflix only one series, Brigadier. What was it? Oh shoot! They just did the one season. Andre, you're shaking your head.
Bridgerton.
From that to Downtown Abbey.
I heard a lot of ladies were watching it for a specific fella, so.
Listen, you show up at my house and you tell me you're burning for me.
Okay, so the next question will come back to you, Andrea. What did you want to be when you were younger?
An accountant. I loved math and started as a math major at Princeton, but then changed to sociology and Judaic studies. Always interested in Black and Jewish relations, but an accountant.
Counselor Isabi George?
Mayor of Boston.
Counselor Wu?
A teacher. I have lots of younger siblings, but I think in some ways I'd always expected I would end up staying at home once I had kids. That's the culture and how my family was with my mom.
Thank you so much to all of the candidates for your enthusiasm tonight and your energy. I do want to lead us into our closing, so you will have time for your closing statement. Thank you as well to our 3 community voices. Thank you so much for being change agents in our community and for bringing forward your voice tonight. For our closing statements, we'll kick it off by alphabetical order. So we will begin with Counselor Campbell.
Thank you so much for having me and for hosting this particular conversation and not making all the questions about the politics, the issues. Of course, it's nice to be able to really share pieces of ourselves. And as I said at the beginning, you know, obviously didn't dream of growing up and running for office or becoming an elected. It sort of came out of pain and tragedy, of turning a lot of pain into purpose. I talk about the fact that the city of Boston gave me everything I would need to be successful. I grew up poor in the city of Boston, a life torn apart by incarceration and instability. And yet I was blessed to go off to Princeton, to law school, and come back and be successful. On the flip side, my twin brother was not. And so the question that drives my work is, how do two twins born and raised in the city of Boston have such different life outcomes? It's reflective of the story of Boston itself. On the one hand, we're a world-class international city by so many metrics. On the other hand, we are still one of the most unequal cities in the country. And I've said since I jumped into this race in September, I refuse to accept that. I refuse to accept it as a mother of two boys. I refuse to accept it as a reputation we have in the city and across the country. And we can change that. The best thing about our city is we have everything it would take to close all of these gaps we've talked about tonight. I have the lived experience, which absolutely is relevant, and it does matter. I've lived almost every inequity you can talk about, but I'm more than a story. I come with substance and a deep and long record of accomplishment on addressing housing affordability, improving Boston public schools, closing these racial wealth gaps and racial inequities. As council president, led the council through a robust racial equity training along with action. That won't change. I have a lot of comprehensive plans at andreacampbell.org. I hope to earn. I had 5 more seconds. I hope to earn your support, and I hope folks will visit my website at andreacampbell.org. Beya, thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, all of you, for your patience with our timekeeping tonight. Thank you. I appreciate it. Councillor Isabi George.
No, thank you very much. I'm going to get into so much trouble for that last comment I said, especially as I see this is being recorded. But I appreciate the opportunity this evening to talk about the real issues, have a little bit of fun with those fun questions that really aren't that much fun. But it's all right to have a couple of laughs with 27 days left, 26 in a few hours. I'm just grateful for all of the organizers making space for tonight's conversation. As the daughter of immigrants, as a former Boston Public Schools teacher, as a small business owner, as a mother of 4 teenage boys, and as an at-large city councilor, I will bring my experiences to the mayor's office. But more importantly, I will bring your experiences to the mayor's office. We've talked a little bit about the need to have diversity and how important representation is. And when we think about gender diversity and racial diversity and ethnic diversity and the diversity of experiences that all brings to the table, it's so important that as I lead with my own personal experiences as an Arab woman here in Boston, leading with those experiences, I can't lead without you beside me. So I look forward to you sharing in that work with me. And we have a lot of work to do together in everything the city of Boston does. We have a responsibility to be very intentional about doing these things, to educate our kids, to dismantle racism, to combat sexism, and to lead with responsibility. It's so important for me that we do this together, and we have a great deal of work to do and to do it together. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about whether it's climate action, education reform, and answering the need for better public health and access to opportunity here in the city of Boston. I'm grateful for all of this and all of you. I hope you will consider me for a vote on September 14th. Check out my website, anisaforboston.com, and be in touch. Inform the work. Help me set the agenda for this city.
Councillor Wu.
Thank you, Beya, for moderating tonight. Thank you to all the organizers and to We Ceremony. It is really moving and powerful that we got to have this conversation tonight. When I first ran for office, it was 8 years ago. It was during the last open mayoral race. And I was just trying to be one more seat on the council that would be representative of women of color. And we ended up doubling the number of women serving on the council that year in 2013 from 1 to 2. I never could have imagined that I would get to be part of this mayoral race now. And even more so, that this is the amazing field of candidates that the city of Boston would get to choose between. So I'm just so inspired even being part of this, and especially tonight, the conversation has really highlighted just why that's important. You know, we are in such a consequential moment for our city. The decisions that we make in the next 3 to 5 years truly will shape and determine what the next 3 to 5 generations in Boston can live with. Will we tackle our housing crisis, climate crisis, our stunning racial wealth gap, and all the ways in which we are falling short of connecting the incredible resources in Boston to our communities who are active and vibrant and struggling to hold on right now in many ways? We have everything we need in Boston, and I'm proud to be running a grassroots campaign that for 11 months now has been focused on building community everywhere across the city, because it is not enough just to think ahead to election day. We need to be building the momentum, the infrastructure, the civic engagement to have a movement to deliver change in office. So I'm proud to be putting forward a bold vision from community and to be organizing along so many of you in making that a reality.
Thank you all so much. I am so grateful to have been able to hold space with each of you tonight. I really want to thank our audience for being engaged, for tuning in. I hope each of you are safe and healthy. Please remember to register to vote by August 25th. And please, please go out to vote on September 14th. I'll bring it back to We Ceremony, our hosts, to close us off for the evening.
Thank you again, once again, to all the candidates, and also a special thank you to Beya for doing an amazing job and keeping us on track. Also a special thank you to our community voices such as Nakia, Fiona, and Coralis as well. We really decided to organize this event, right, to uplift and center the stories of women of color, and I really deeply appreciate it so much. Just your genuine responses and getting to know you all a little bit more, especially Anissa with her Bridgerton answer. So thank you again once so much. Please follow us, our social media platforms. We've been around since 2015, just doing and organizing different events in the city. And I'm also going to drop more information in terms of Fiona's organizing campaign around the People's Budget. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the attendees. We'll be sending around this recording afterwards for folks that provided their email addresses with us. And let's continue to work together to cross boundaries and create intentional change. Thank you so much and have a good evening.